Okay, so today we're going to look at the IGCSE geography and O-level geography, the topic of population. So this is one of the main topics that is in both IGCSE geography and O-level geography. The content for the IGCSE and for the O-level is exactly the same. The only difference is in how the exam papers are. So the syllabus is exactly the same. So population dynamics, migration, population structure, population density and distribution are all in the topic of population. So this is just revision. So this is not a complete in-depth lesson about the population topic. This is revision, so it will have the main points in that you need to know and the formulas as well that you will need to know for your IGCSE or your O-level geography exam. So let's get started with population. Okay, so the population rate growth rate can change. And the population growth rate is the natural increase or decrease of a population, which depends on the difference between the birth and the death rates. So the birth rate is the number of babies born each year per 1,000 people. The death rate is the number of people who die each year per 1,000 people. So to work out what the population growth rate is, this is called the natural population growth. You take the birth rate and you subtract the death rate. For example, if your birth rate is 19.5 and your death rate is 8.8, that's per 1,000 people, then you do 19.5 subtract 8.8, which equals 10.7. Now that's a positive number, so that's an increase. So in your percentage, that's 1.07% growth. So if we just swap those numbers around for a second, so if we make it so that our birth rate became 8.8 and our death rate became 19.5, then we would look at 8.8 minus 19.5, which is a negative 10.7 per 1,000. So in percentage, that would be minus 1.07%. So that would be a decrease of our population. So what factors can change a population? There are three main factors that are covered in this. You can have social factors, economic factors, and political factors. And also in these exams and in your lessons, you will see the abbreviations for LEDC and MEDC. So the LEDC is the less economically developed countries, and the MEDC are the more economically developed countries. In your exams, it may not have the full name. It probably, well, I'm not sure. But the papers that I have seen so far, it doesn't say less economically developed countries. It says LEDCs. So you need to really know what those mean before you go into your exam. So the LEDC is a less economically developed country, and the MEDC is a more economically developed country. So there are some factors which affect the population growth rates. Main factors that are covered is the increase of the population in the late 1700s, which was due to agricultural and the Industrial Revolution. This really took place in North America and Europe. And really, basically, the new agricultural machinery led to greater crop yields with fewer workers. So many rural people moved to urban areas to work in the expanding industries over there. And as countries then became more prosperous, they were able to support larger populations and families with more than 10 children were common in the late 1800s. The death rate began to fall because of advances in medical care, and that led to what's called a population explosion because the birth rate was still quite high. So that really are that's really the effect of the agricultural and the industrial revolution from the late 1700s. We've just mentioned briefly there the advances in medical care leads to lower death rates. In the Second World War, this is a factor which affected growth rates as well. Women joined the workforce because during the Second World War, the majority of men were in the army and were not at home. So in Europe, in England, definitely in the UK, women joined the workforce. So then there was a delay in them having children. So that affected the population growth rate. Also, economic factors can also affect the population growth rates. A desire for material possessions and high standards of living can result in a drop in the population growth rates as people don't put having large families at the top of their priority list. And the last factor is immigrant flow. So the flow of immigrants and emigrants can also affect growth rates of a population. So high birth rates, some of the reasons for high birth rates. There are cultural and social reasons, one of them being prestige. So in many cultures, the more children you have, particularly a man, the more children a man has, the greater his prestige and his social standing in society. Also, family name. Some cultures have a desire to carry on the family name that is passed down through the male line, and parents will often keep on having more children until they have a son to carry on the family name. The next cultural and social reason can be a retirement plan. In many countries that don't have good care services for the elderly and don't have good pension provision for old age, people have to make sure that they've got children to look after them in their old age. So they may have lots of children to make sure that they can be provided for as they get older. Polygamy is another factor. Polygamy is where one man can have more than one wife. So in polygamous societies, a man may have several children at once if like more than one of his wives is pregnant at one time. So you tend to have higher birth rates in polygamous societies. The demographic reason is for the high female population. If you have a high female population, then you tend to have higher birth rates. And economic. So children work is one of the reasons for high birth rates. In LEDCs, there are sometimes children are born to provide labour eventually for the family's livelihood if they have a farm, or they want extra workers to boost the family income. There's also less money for things like contraception. People have got less disposable income, and contraception is not a thing that's high on the priority list. Also, in societies that have a lack of medical facilities, a lack of family planning clinics also can have an impact, and unfortunately, infant mortality as well. So infant mortality is when children die within their first year of life. So countries that have high levels of infant mortality are more likely to have higher birth rates. Okay, so the reasons for falling death rates. The reasons for falling death rates can generally be seen to have a few factors. The first one is the development of medicines and of medical knowledge. So we get better trained doctors, greater access to clinics that travels out to rural areas that will lower the death rates. There are also treatments for typhoid, cholera, and HIV and AIDS, which will also have an impact in reducing death rates. Aid agencies coming into LEDCs to bring clean water and sanitation can have an impact, and knowledge. Having the knowledge of what constitutes a healthy diet and a healthy lifestyle can impact and make death rates fall, and food supply access. A lack of food supply will lead to people being undernourished and too weak to fight off infections. So if you have a good food supply, good food access, then that is less likely, and death rates fall as well. Okay, so reasons for high death rates. So reasons for high death rates can change very quickly. We have 3 examples here: war, natural disasters, and pandemics. So these are things that can very quickly affect the death rates and increase them, but for limited times only. So wars, they start, they end, but while they are ongoing, there's a high death rate. The same with natural disasters. And as we've recently seen in 2020, the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic has a very quick effect. It increases death rates very quickly, but it is for a limited period of time only. So we have other factors. These are long. They have like long effects, and they last for a long time. So we have obesity, alcoholism, smoking, cancer, and stress, and an aging population. So these things, they're not very quick events. They are long-term issues and long-term problems that can increase death rates. Okay, so now on to migration. So migration is, well, the definition of migration is the movement of people from one place to another. So we have emigrants and immigrants, and the easy way to remember this is that emigrants are those who leave. So E is for exit, and E is the first letter in emigrants. So those who leave a place are emigrants. Those who come to a place, who add to a country, they are immigrants. And in begins with an I, which is the first letter of immigrants. So that's just a way to easily remember. Emigrants exit, so they leave. Immigrants come in, so they add to a country's population. So net migration for an area. This is a formula that you may be asked to work out the net migration in your exam. So net migration for a particular area is the number of immigrants subtract the number of emigrants. So you take the number of immigrants, the number of people who are coming into a country, and you subtract the number of emigrants. So that's the number of immigrants who are leaving the country. And if more people come into the country than go out, the net migration is a positive figure. If more leave than come in, it is a negative figure, and expressed either per thousand or as a percentage change. So that's how you find out net migration. So if we want to work out the overall population growth or the overall population fall, then what we need to do is find out the natural change. So the natural change was the birth rate subtracting the death rate, and then we add to that net migration. and net migration is the number of immigrants coming into a country and subtract the number of immigrants who leave the country. And so that's how we find out the population growth or fall overall, including migration. Okay, so overpopulation and underpopulation are two terms that you need to know the definitions of. Overpopulation is when there are too many people to be supported to a good standard of living by the country's resources. So there's just too many people and the resources are overwhelmed. And underpopulation is when there are too few people to use all the resources of a country to maximum efficiency. So that's when there's really not enough people and there's an overabundance of the resources of the country. So you can apply overpopulation and underpopulation to areas and to countries. So you could have a country that has large areas that are underpopulated and also has areas that are overpopulated within the same country. So you can apply it to areas within countries or to countries on their own. Rapid population growth can cause quite a few problems. So what happens when the population grows rapidly is that it places too much pressure on resources. The resources that a country has can't keep up with the increased demand of the new population. So it may be difficult to feed everyone, which will mean people go hungry. There aren't enough schools and teachers, which means there will possibly be a lack of education and skills. And basic health care. The country can't afford good basic health care, which in turn means that millions will suffer from illnesses and disease that are preventable. So sustainable development. So you need to know what the definition of sustainable development is. And so it's defined as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So basically, you need to meet the needs of the present population without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. So for a population to be sustainable, the rate at which it grows must not threaten the survival of the future generations. So a population that's growing too rapidly or one that is falling won't be sustainable. Now we're going to pop just a little bit back to migration again. So migration, it can be internal, international, voluntary or involuntary. So internal migration is migration within the same country. So it's people moving from one area of a country to another area of a country. This can be from things like natural disasters. It's often temporary, but that's internal migration. International migration is where people move from one country to another country. Voluntary migration is where people decide to move. They have a choice. They can either move or they can stay, but they decide to move. So that's voluntary. And involuntary migration is when there's no choice, but they have to move. And migration can be summarized. The reasons why people might migrate are often described as push and pull factors. So push factors are factors that force a person or force people to leave their own country. So the main reasons are economic. There's not enough jobs or there are low wages, poor educational opportunities, poor healthcare, war, civil war and lawlessness, or drought and famine. Okay, so we have, well, those are the factors that are pushing people away from their own country, and you have pull factors that attract people to a new country. So the pull factors that pull people into a new country are the hope of employment, higher wage rates, better healthcare, better education systems, a better standard of living, family and friends. So family and friends may already be in a new country and they want to go join their family and their friends. And the last pull factor is a lower crime rate. So if there are lower crime rates and safety from conflict. So these are all the reasons for international migration from one country to another country. So internal migration, the reasons are similar, and as I've just mentioned a second ago, you also have the addition of moving away from local natural disasters, which are often temporary. Okay, so this graph does look really complicated, but it isn't. This is the top part is the demographic transition in 5 stages. So these are the 5 stages that most MEDCs have already experienced, and these are the expectations for other countries to follow. So we start at the top. We start at stage 1. And as you can see at stage 1, the birth rate and the death rate are high. But the total population is pretty low. Stage 2, this is what most LEDCs are in. So stage 2 is where the birth rate is high and the death rate begins to fall rapidly. So this is where most LEDCs are. So stage 3 are NICs. Now, NIC stands for Newly Industrialized Country. So the newly industrialized countries are in stage 3, where the birth rate starts to fall and the death rate, as you can see, it's falling but slowly. Stage 4, this is where most MEDCs are now. So the birth rate is low, the death rate is low. And then we have stage 5. This is where some MEDCs are, such as Japan. So this is where the birth rate is starting to rise again and the death rate is still low. So that is the demographic transition in 5 stages. So you need to know which each stage is. So stage 1 is the beginning, stage 2 is most LEDCs, stage 3 are the NICs, or the newly industrialized countries, stage 4 is most MEDCs, and stage 5 is some MEDCs. So the difference between stage 4 and 5 is in stage 4 the birth rate stays low, but in stage 5 the birth rate starts to rise again. So the bottom part of this chart is the population pyramid. So I think we can see the population pyramid a little bit closer, which is this. So as you can see, the shapes of the pyramid belong to each separate stage. And the population pyramids, there are 3 age groups on the pyramid. The bottom age group is from 0 to 15 years old. The middle of the pyramid is 15 to 65, and then the top of the pyramid is 65 plus. Now those are broken into sections. 15 and below are seen as being dependent on other people. Then you've got your kind of independent and working age range from 15 to 65, and then above 65 is again seen as dependent on other people for the elderly generation. Of course, this is very generalized as in places like the UK, 15 years old is not seen as really being like independent and being a part of the workforce, but generally these are the ages that the population pyramid is segregated into. So that's just an easier way to see the shapes of the pyramids in relation to which stage they are on. The population structure has a dependency ratio, and you're going to need to know the formula for working out the dependency ratio. So the dependency ratio is, it summarizes how many people there are in a society that are dependent on other people. So the young dependents are like the children, the old dependents are those who are the older generation who need to be looked after. So with the dependency ratio, the formula is the young dependents plus the old dependents. You take that sum and you divide it by the working population, and then you multiply that figure by 100. And that is the formula for working out the dependency ratio. You're also going to have to know the formula for the population density. So population density is how many people there are in a certain area. So the formula that you need to know is population density equals the total population divided by the area in kilometers squared. So that's the formula that you need to work out for population density. There is also population distribution, which is not the same as population density. So population density is how many people there are in an area. The population distribution looks at how the population is spread out in an area. So it's not the same thing. If a question is asking you for population density, you want to be looking at the total population in an area. If a question is asking you about the population distribution, you want to be looking at how spread out the population is in a certain area. Now, the IGCSE and the O-level geography have case studies, and these are case studies that are used to show examples of some of the issues that we've just had a very brief look at. So there is a case study for Botswana, which is the impact of HIV and AIDS on the population. Bangladesh is used as a case study for an overpopulated country. Australia as an underpopulated country. Niger as a rapid population growth area. China is used as a case study for having a one-child policy, and Japan is a case study for declining population. There is also Germany and Europe, which are used for case studies for migration. Botswana is for international and internal migration. Japan is used as a case study to highlight the high elderly population. Niger is used as a case study to show that there's a high young population, and Bangladesh is used as a case study for a high population density area. So I've not looked at the case studies one by one. I can look at the case studies one by one. If you would like me to go over any of the case studies, just pop me a comment in the comments, and I can definitely do a video on each individual case study. But these are case studies that you should already have the notes for in your studies and in your revision books. These are common case studies for the IGCSE and the O-level geography exam. You can also use local case studies, but these are the ones that are quite well documented. So I would go with these particular case studies. If anybody would like me to go over an individual case study, then I can definitely do that. So thank you very much for joining me today. I hoped this has helped you. So this has just been about population, which is just one section of the exam. So the next section that I'm going to be looking at is section 2, which is on settlement and urbanization. Anything else you would like me to help you with, just leave me a comment, and I hope this has been useful. Please give me a thumbs up if you did like this video and subscribe. Thank you so much for joining me today, and if you are sitting your geography exam soon, the very best of luck.